Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Agioff, the president of the Metro Maryland ARMA chapter, and we're happy to have all of you here for our monthly webinar. Tonight we have Tom Rieger from the Library of Congress speaking, and we'll hear more about him in a minute. I just want to let you know that we have some great programs coming up in future months. In December, on December 7th, we'll be having Mr. Corey Lewis, who is the Assistant State Archivist for Maryland, and he will be talking about how the State Archives is has created a program for crowdsourcing their digitization projects. Then in January, on the 11th, we will have Abby Mosheim from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and she's going to be talking about how she's the Assistant Attorney General for the CPSC, and she's going to be talking about how her agency is automating the FOIA process. So those are the projects we have coming up in the near future. And now, Beth, would you like to introduce our speaker for tonight?
Okay, so tonight we have Thomas Rieger from the Library of Congress. He's a graduate of the Rochester Institute of Technology. And so he will be discussing current challenges and opportunities with digitizing, out with the old school technology standards and guidelines and in with the new FADGI M1921 and ISO 19264. So take it away, Tom.
Great, thank you. A little bit of an introduction. I've been in this field for half a century, and it's gone from photographic, film, paper, chemicals, that sort of thing, into the 1970s, where we started to understand that there's something beyond that, to where we are today. We would have never guessed where we would be now back then. And well, I'll take you on a little bit of a tour. Oh, come on, give me the next slide. Why isn't it not? Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to have to do it from the bottom here, it looks like. There we go. Okay. Not used to seeing it down there. Anyway, what I'm going to do here is give you a little bit of a view into the digitization standards and processes that we use at the Library of Congress. And I think you'll get the sense along the way how complicated it actually is to pull together a continuous, evolving, standards compliant, traceable, and good digitization program at scale. Now, the key there is at scale, and I'm sure all of you are dealing at scale and not at the boutique level where we're just doing some of this and some of that. Many of the programs that are out there today are facing the reality of M1921, which is supposedly going into effect, well, not very, in what, 6 weeks, something like that. At least that's the current plan that I've heard. And that should have woken everyone up a couple of years ago as to how massive a project that is, how process that is. And I did give briefings to several federal agencies explaining to them exactly what that entails. And I think they were all shell-shocked when they left the briefings, because it's not simple. And what we're doing at the Library of Congress is, as far as I know, the largest sustained cultural heritage digitization program in the world. Now, that's cultural heritage. That's not federal records, which is much of what you're dealing with. But we do understand federal records, and we have to do a small portion of our work is federal records. So we actually helped develop that process. We'll get to that in a second. Talk about, for a minute, the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative. This started about 20 years ago now, with its roots at the National Archives. Shortly after they kind of started it up, it became a program run out of the Library of Congress. And it has been the home of FADGI. We have been the home for FADGI since that time. I'm the third person running the program, running the imaging side of the program. There is a parallel program at the Library of Congress that supports audiovisual and motion picture. And those two sides are different enough that while we know each other, we rarely collaborate in any way because the fields are just so much different. So in front of you are some of the members. There are also any number of non-member institutions that we work with unofficially. Now, officially by charter, FADGI is federal agencies only, but it has become actually a worldwide brand, if you will, a worldwide standard. Many countries around the world have translated our documents for their use. It's freely available to do that. We speak at international conferences, we teach internationally, we spread the word basically to try and get standards-based digitization, traceable digitization, if you will, adopted around the world. And it's been quite successful. So I consider this as to be a never-ending journey. You know, we started way back in the film days. The concepts that we evolved for managing programs in film are not that different than what we have now, than what we're evolving now. The problem, however, is as we've entered into the digital era, the variables are just so much greater. And that is just something we constantly work on trying to refine. Earlier this week, we had a 2-day meeting of the International Standards Organization, TC42 Working Group 26 in Washington, to start dealing with, actually not start, but to continue dealing with the imaging specifications for transparent media, which is far, far more complicated to deal with than reflective media. That standard, 19264, ISO 19264, was actually finished about, well, I guess 5 years ago now, somewhere like that. But it took us forever to get to that point. The Europeans had one view of what that meant. We had another view of what that meant. And it took an awful lot of, I'll call it diplomacy, to come to a standard understanding of the science behind all of this, which is far different than what we had to deal with back in the film era. So ISO 19264-1, which is the reflective media standard, is now the worldwide standard. Now, FADGI and Metamorphosa, which is the European implementation of this, agree on everything that is in that document. That's it. There's no revision to that in the sense that the science behind it is correct. Now, I will say that we contemplate making adjustments to this as we have data from around the world on is this valid? Did we make a mistake in some of the assumptions in here, or has the science changed? So it's not like it's inflexible, but if you've ever worked with the International Standards Organization, you know it is a slow process to make changes, and that's intentional. So here's the history in short. Anywhere from the 1960s to the mid-1990s, we were dealing with analog film and papers and all that sort of thing. And we were doing precision negative and positive reproductions. There were tight standards for doing that kind of work. They parallel what we're doing today, but they were obviously analog. So all the stuff that we're now doing, all of these processes have their roots in what we developed back then. So as we get into the mid-'80s, now digital processes are beginning to be invented, truly. This is an era before any kind of color science, color management, color technologies to, well, just calibrate the screen that you're looking at tonight. or any of the printers or any of the capture devices. None of that existed at that point in time. If you can imagine how crazy that was, but there weren't any ways of doing this. There were no standards whatsoever. So this was figure it out as you go. An awful lot of roadkill along the way, things that we thought might work that didn't. And now let's move forward just a little bit in time to somewhere around 1995 or so. We started to get our act together as an industry, as a science. Kodak Color Flow was the first serious attempt at being able to quantify color and manage it digitally. And you can see some of the other things in there. You may not know the term ICC color management. That's International Color Consortium. That is the backbone of color definition and color well, it's the backbone of color imaging today as we know it, and it's everywhere. You may not even know it's happening. You go to a digital movie, that's behind that. The fact that when you're going to buy something on the internet and the color is more or less correct, you can thank ICC color management for that, because if you didn't have decent color on all of your devices today, you couldn't have e-commerce the way it is. It just, I didn't buy that color, I bought this color, and everything would go back. So there's great incentive to get this right, and it is pretty darn close to right at this point. So in 2010, I've got on here that we came out with the first edition of the FADGI guidelines. And it's still out there if you care to torture yourself to read a technical document, because that's what that is. It was so technical that almost no one could follow it, almost no one could understand it. So we knew at that point we had work to do. Now, Metamorphosa, which is a European one, followed with standards but no guidance in 2012. And this is a big distinction between the FADGI program and the Metamorphosa program in Europe. We provide guidance. We try to provide as much contextual information to the standards and specifications as we can, where Metamorphosa does not do that at all. They simply publish the material, and it's up to you to figure it out. So here you go. We have now completed 2 versions of the FADGI guidelines, 10 and 16, and the 22 revision is out there now. The public comment period for that has closed, and we are within a couple of weeks of finalizing the 2023 final version of version 3. That'll be published in January. Now, critical to what you're working on is M1921. We've been working with the National Archive since that document was signed to come up with the imaging standards for that, not the entire program, but just the imaging standards for M1921, which are based on our 20 years or so experience with digitizing reflective material. So we know what the standard should be, a decent standard for digitizing reflective material and modern documents and whatnot, all the way through CE 1000 materials. We've got standards and specs for all of that. So we took what we knew about document scanning, and we came up with a compromise, a good standard for this emerging M1921 product or program, understanding that at that point, there were no scanners on the market that could do it. Nothing. As far as high-speed document scanners, everything on the market could not achieve this specification. And even today, there are very few document scanners out there that can pass. That should scare the hell out of everyone right now, because you're supposed to be doing it in a couple months. And good luck, because there aren't many, there's only a few out there that could hold up under the volume. We have one of the early ones. I don't like mentioning brands, so I won't. but it's already obsolete. So it's what it is, right? That's what happens. So now, having taught or told you a little bit about color science and ICC color management and all of this stuff, you got to be asking yourself, why bother? Why do we need all this? It looks pretty good to me, right? Well, this is the start of a little bit of education on color science as it applies to what we all do. You see a patch marked A and a patch marked B. And unless you're a unique human being, they look entirely different to you. A is darker than B, right? Yeah, okay, good. You're normal if that's the case. This has to do with the way the human brain doesn't show you what's really there in a lot of cases. If I put a reference there, you can see that they're exactly the same. Exactly the same. If you look at the intersections of where the solid gray bars intersect both of those A and B, they are identical. And that has to do with the way the eye sees the shadow and that green cylinder. It absolutely just changes your view of things. Now, with that in mind, this is what happens when similar things in your environment interfere with the way your eye sees color. These are 6 representations of this painting in the same database, all done by institutions that said these are really good scans. These are the best. These are institutions that know their stuff, and they swore by this is good stuff. Well, you can see it's not. This was from a symposium in 2010 at Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, where they did a study with 20 of the best imaging, digital imaging programs around the world, told them what it was all about, gave them a set of identical images to scan, nothing hard, and this is what we got back, or this is what they got back. So that was eye-opening that we got a problem. And the only way to resolve something like this is to develop up a set of standards and metrics and testing procedures to make this go away. This can't happen in an information society where we're swapping information, swapping images around the world. We can't have this kind of deviation. And we certainly can't afford to have this in federal records under M1921. Virtually all of these would fail. So what we had to do, now this, of course, this predates M1921, but what we had to do to fix this was take a ground up look at what tools were out there to normalize the color, to be able to know we're doing it correctly. And they weren't out there. There were remnants or relics, I should say, from the photo industry back in the 70s and early 80s that were not designed for what we do. They were color checkers and things like that just had no real science behind them. That's me being a little bit harsh, but certainly as related to the digital era, they were not up to the task. So what we did at the Library of Congress under the banner of FADGI, all right, and we support it, we fund it, is we first developed the target on the right. So what is that? One of the big problems we had with all of the existing targets was they're not the same. They don't measure the same. They're made at different times. They fade, they get scratched, somebody touches them and they're no good anymore. So we commissioned one of the top imaging scientists in the world, color scientists, to develop for us a reference which is actually traceable back to the NIST standard, and it doesn't fade, and it can be cleaned. So that is actually multi primary dye sets or pigment sets back painted to acrylic, and the acrylic is a special acrylic that doesn't change when you clean it. So now we have something that we can use around the world and know that the values are the same, regardless of where it's being done. And it shouldn't change any 5-10 years. It shouldn't. Well, this one is 2014, I think. So it just doesn't change. So that's fine. Now we can all talk the same language. We can all say white is white, gray is gray, black is black, and be talking exactly the same digital numbers. That led to the target on the left. See, the target on the right is for setup and calibration. The target on the left is for daily production monitoring. Now, this target is very, very similar to what you are going to see as the final production target for M1921. There's a problem with the target on the left as you see it there, because that was designed for copy stand or book scanner kinds of applications. And it's mounted to an aluminum plate, right? You're not going to get that through a sheet fed scanner. Sorry, it's just not going to go. And when we attempted to adapt this design to the sheet fed scanners, those that had a straight imaging path, it survived. Those with a multiple curve imaging path, it ripped it to shreds. So not very good. And they're expensive, so you don't want to be doing that. We're working through the nits right now of adapting that for M1921 and also driving the cost way down, because that target right there would cost well over $1,000. Not good if you have to throw them away every few months. So we are working with the National Archives on that, but primarily this kind of development is done at the Library of Congress in support of programs around the world. Excuse me. Now, as far as measuring color goes, this is how we do it. There are several of these programs out in the world, by the way. So we can very, very precisely know if the color that you're getting with your system is within tolerances or not. You don't just look at it, you measure it. And all of that stuff you see up there, the means and the maximums and the delta EAB and all that sort of stuff, that is in the ISO standard, and that is in the M1921 standard, which I'll show you in a little bit. So there's no guesswork here. We know exactly what it is. And if you don't meet the standard, you don't meet the standard. Now, when it comes to M1921, I keep coming back to that because I think that's where you folks are focused. The originals are getting destroyed as part of this process. So you better get it right. You better be able to say that there was a hand notation in the corner of this thing and we've captured it correctly. And what color ink was it? All of those sorts of things. If you're going to destroy the originals, you better have a really, really high quality surrogate in that digital file. You won't get that if you don't follow the standards. This one, to give you an idea, talks about the density curve. Is white white and is black black? And how black is black? This is a very well behaved curve because all the lines flow nicely to that red ideal curve. I've seen systems where they're absolutely all over the place, and no, that won't work. Can't allow that. Here, for example, is a representation of the sharpness, to put it in terms that people understand. This looks pretty good. It's not bad at all. Those lines are nice and tight together, but it fails because it's actually not sharp enough. It should go through those gates that you see in the middle of the field there, right up and through here, and it does not. So this would not pass because it's not sharp enough, meaning you're going to have fine detail that you haven't captured. And boy, I saw some examples of that just the other day. Maps where the topographic lines just disappeared if the resolution wasn't sufficient. That wouldn't fly. Here's what happens when it really looks bad. They're just all over the place. And again, this is typical for systems that are in the market today, where they're just not calibrated well, or the sensors aren't high enough quality. This would make absolutely horrific duplicate images for you that would not pass, and certainly not meet any use standard that you have. So, okay, now I'm going to take a slight detour, and we're going to talk about light itself. You saw the images I showed you earlier, the same image of painting. Well, how is that possible that the good, normal people who are well trained in all of this can get it that bad, get it that wrong? Well, here is a typical distribution of light. It's a graph of the light spectrum from a Solux lamp, fairly common reference lamp. At least it used to be. This is what a reproduction light booth that you would find in a print house looks like. This is fluorescent tubes where you have spikes. This used to be as good as you could get. And you can see it's got problems, and it would make it very difficult to do a decent analysis of a sample. Here's what your office looks like. You just can't do it here. You're completely missing color in some pretty important areas. And while your eye sees this light as white, that's because it's doing exactly what I showed you in the earlier slide with that green cylinder. It's making assumptions by saying, I know that paint is white on the wall, so I'm gonna interpret that as white for you. But if you're looking at photographs or bar charts or whatever it is that your record has, you're not going to see everything that should be in there, or it's going to display it incorrectly. Your eyes are going to interpret it incorrectly for you. So this is really a problem, because this is basically what's out there right now if you have fluorescent lights in your office environments. Now, as we are all moving to LEDs, most of those are a bit better than this, but still, there are cheap LEDs and there are really, really good LEDs and everything in between. So you don't know unless your viewing environment is tested and you have the proper equipment to actually measure that. When we built our new scan center at the Library of Congress, we wrote it into the spec that it had to be high CRI, above 90 plus. And and the architect of the Capitol, who of course is the construction organization that takes care of all this for us, understood what we were asking for and agreed to do it. And we are now going to get it 3 years later because it was not done. That's another story in itself. So anyway, here is a view of our digitization center at the Library of Congress. You can see to the far left of that picture, you have 3 high-speed document scanners there. 2 of them are old school, if you will. They will not pass M1921, and the one on the far left does. It's new production that was designed to pass 1921. It does, but I can tell you it's already obsolete, and to actually get it to pass 1921 is almost more trouble than it's worth. Oh, I'm going to go back on that just a little bit. The other 2 scanners that you see here, I don't know if you'll have much that fits these 2 requirements, but the one labeled Triventus here is for books that can't open all that far. We have any number of historical items that if you tried to open them very far, you'd break the bindings. That device can handle that. And the one on the far right here is a high-speed book scanner, which can do, well, I don't know, 800-900 pages an hour all day long. There's a 3-letter agency out there that came to visit us and asked about this last year sometime. They went and bought a fleet of these things and digitized an entire library. So you may or may not have that kind of requirement, but it can be done today. This is a view going the other direction down there. You can see a row of what we call planetary cameras, planetary scanners. That's the primary workhorse for us because they're flexible and they're actually a lot faster than it might seem. The basics of these systems are maybe 15, 20 years old. All the electronics have been replaced in the last year or two. Give you a closer look up at that. This is a typical one. You're looking at about $250,000 worth of equipment right here. It's not inexpensive to do this kind of work at a quality level and at a production scale that'll keep going year after year. This is very, very expensive lights. I think they're around $19,000 each. The camera is just short of $100,000. Over here, you've got calibrated monitor. Now, calibrated by meaning it calibrates itself to a standard. Adds cost, but it's actually cheaper than having to do it by hand if you even have staff that know how to do that. And doing it wrong is worse than not doing it at all. So, yeah. So anyway, the library follows the federal agency's digital guidelines initiatives. I hope so, because we wrote them. And it's also baked into our master documents, if you will. This was a win for us maybe 6-7 years ago, where the library was satisfied enough that this was important, and they wrote it into the library's master plan, strategic plan, and it has been in there ever since. Now, we call them guidelines. However, we write the appropriate guidelines, quote unquote, into every contract that we do. At that point, they are not guidelines. They're required. They're by contract required. And for all of the digitization that we contract out and all of the work we do in-house, we expect targets to be delivered to us every day from every system being operated. And we have staff that analyze those. If they fail, they get to do the work over again. We're pretty strict about that. Now, if you're building up an M1921 program, compliance is a big issue here for you. You're going to have processes in place to verify that what's being done is correct. This is expertise. This is budget that no one is really accounting for. And I've been screaming at all of the institutions that could train people to do this. They don't care. They don't have a program to teach this. Those of us who learned it years ago, we're getting old, and the young kids coming up, there's only a handful that actually understand enough of this to run the technology behind all of this. It's kind of scary because, well, I don't know where you're going to get the talent, to be honest with you. I just don't know. Now, down here at the bottom, it says there's a website address here, digitizationguidelines.gov. Everything that we've published is there. The older versions of the guidelines, the new versions of the guidelines are there, including the 2022 version, which has M1921 in it. Now, that is just the imaging specifications for M1921. We do not have anything to do with the rest of the program's requirements. For that, you need to go to the National Archives. And I don't think they've quite finished with the development of all of that. You know, I can't help you with that. In fact, I do talk to them frequently. In fact, just Monday and Tuesday, I met with them. But as far as trying to speak for them, I can't do that. So to give you an idea, M1921 is based on this. This was FADGI's 3-star, meaning good but not great, imaging specification for documents. And most of this is just gibberish to almost everybody. But it's pretty straightforward in that it's saying it wants to be 300 or 400 pixels per inch. You may know it as dot per inch, same thing. Now that's key to know, because all you have at the end of the day is a digital file. And how do you know what size that original was? Well, if it was done correctly to either of those two specifications, and that specification is in the file metadata, and we do collect a lot of metadata here, then we know what the size of that original was. And that plays an important role in all of this later on. 8 or 16-bit master file, what does that mean? That's the number of steps between white and black in the red, green, and blue channels if it's color. 8 will get you 256 steps. 16 will get you something like 16,000 something or other discrete steps between white and black in each of the 3 color channels, which is just billions of colors. 16 is overkill for M1921, but it's an option. It's there. It needs to conform to ICC color management rules. There are a few specific color environments, color spaces we call them, that are allowable. The problem is there's so many of them, and you can make your own if you're crazy, and people do. But in a standardized environment like we all work in, that doesn't cut it. You can't do that. So Adobe 98 or sRGB as appropriate. And again, you need to have people who understand what's appropriate here making those decisions. If it's a full color photograph, especially if it's transparent media, it's Adobe 98. If it's just text on paper, sRGB is probably fine and actually preferred for a bunch of reasons. So that's where an understanding of digitization is critical for the people that are directing your programs. And this is hardly taught anywhere anymore. OECF, that is optoelectronic conversion function. What does that mean? That means how accurately is white, white, black, black, and gray, gray along the whole ramp on up from white to black. And that says it should be within 6 measurable count levels from that perfect curve line that I showed you earlier. Sharpening, you can't have a whole lot of sharpening in these files because it destroys the actual integrity of the file. But a cheap way of making something look better than it is to put on a whole lot of sharpening. So that's the first thing we do when we get a device in, is we go, yeah, you sharpened this, didn't you? Because I can tell. You can see that on the graphs. And no, take it off, and then it fails. So what do? Right? You force the manufacturers to do it right. So anyway, there's more stuff here that you need to know as you're buying equipment, as you're specifying equipment. And that's where the FADGI guidance on equipment purchasing or equipment specifications is really useful, because you can specify that it has to pass FADGI 3-star, for example. And the manufacturer, if that's in your contract, then the manufacturer is bound to do it, or they have not met the contract. And if you try to make up your own standards or just accept it and say, yeah, this looks really good, you're probably not going to get what you think you're going to get, and that can cause problems later on. So anyway, here it is. This is the National Archives M1921 specification as published in the latest FADGI guidelines under the heading of Modern Textual Records. That is their heading that they chose for this. And there are 3 pages. You'll be getting this presentation, and you could also just pull it down from digitizationguidelines.gov. But there are any number of elements here that need to be met to be compliant. And you're going to have to prove to archives that you've met the spec, or they're going to reject the materials. It's not a simple task. So there's the second page of it. No reason to really stay on it for very long, but it talks about some of the things I talked about earlier about the reproduction scale accuracy. That's pixels PPI, pixels per inch, dots per inch. That means something. They are actually correct. It was actually a a chat on ImageMuse, which is a photographers forum for cultural heritage mostly, talking about, well, a vendor did it wrong, did 300 where it was supposed to be 400. The institution rejected it, sent it back, comes back, and now all of a sudden the metadata says it's 400, but the image is the same. They fudged the metadata, okay, and they got caught. Now, does that really matter? Yeah, it does, because now we don't know what size it was, and that can get you into real trouble later on. So yeah, we see things like that once in a while. I've actually seen it where the metadata specifications for the color that's in the system was adjusted, let's say, to make it pass. No, you can't change the reference to make your bad work pass. So it's more than just running it through a software program and saying, yes, this passed. Somebody's got to understand what that means. And then, of course, there's the fine print. And that basically in this case says that these are the minimum requirements needed to meet the National Archives proposed regulations. You're allowed to do better, and it shouldn't be that hard to do better, but that's the way it is. Now, I'm going to run you through a little bit of how we manage digitization programs at the library to give you a sense of what's all involved in doing a program at scale. You can swap in any kind of source material that you might be digitizing, but this process is pretty close. So we've got, what is that, six steps more or less in this thing. We've got multiple lanes, meaning you've got lots of different source types that you're going to be digitizing. It's not all going to be 8.5, 11 cut sheets. You're going to have a lot of different things, including photos, foldouts, who knows, right? So you're going to have separate processes set up to handle all of those, because you can't just shove it through a sheet feed machine. It won't work. And certainly sometimes you're not going to want to do that. So, and you're also likely to have, as in our case, two endpoints, the Library of Congress website, lsc.gov, and something we call stacks, which is for material that we can't distribute, stuff that can't leave the building, but it might be in copyright, it might be restricted for other reasons, but you got to come and see us in order to take a look at it, and you can't take it home with you. So, but there's so much material that we have that fits that stacks situation that it was essential that we do that, we build that capability, but also right from the start of a project, right from the concept side of the project, we set it down the right path. We set it down the right lane for the right kind of production. So here you go. I'm not going to read through all this. That would be take too long. But anyway, the organizations submit their various proposals. We have about 100 or so of them in the hopper at any given time. This one says 84 currently in the backlog in various stages. That number goes up and down. We then review them to make sure that they are valid proposals, that they look good. This is before they're ever really reviewed and approved. So our staff in DCMS, Digital Collections Management and Services, works to make these proposals viable and something that we know that deserves the attention of the people that will be doing the evaluation of go or no go. So we know how to do that. We know what they look for. So we have staff that work with divisions to make them proper, to make them correct. And then we determine the proper path for that proposal. And like I said, there's various lanes. Sometimes they don't need the upper level approval. Sometimes they can come straight down to production. Really depends on what they are. So, okay, let's say that we've gotten some sort of an approval. At this point, we go to a feasibility study, and you'll see that in the next slide or two. But actually, this slide deals with the Digital Library Content Group, which is what I was just referring to, the high-level representatives. They have a very limited bandwidth for numbers of proposals that they can review in a given year. Their time is incredibly valuable. They don't have much of it spare. So we make sure that we give them good proposals. At best, they're doing 2 a month, and at best they can do 2 to 3 per session. So it's a very narrow band of stuff that they can deal with. Come on, there it goes. Okay, fine. Here we go. So everything starts getting tracked from the moment it becomes, just a thought. If a division is thinking about doing something, we record that. If they need assistance in making that more fleshed out, we provide that assistance or we coach them on that. We meet bi-weekly with all of the key players around the library who either deal with digitization or are key elements in the process, key bottlenecks, if you will. For example, conservation. They have a limited capacity, and we can't touch anything in our world until a conservator looks at it, says, yeah, okay, this one's good to go, or no, you're not touching this until we fix it. There's just too many issues that can happen. And it may well be the same with M1921. Is it all there? You better find out at the start before you digitize it, because you have to have chain of evidence that says, yeah, that's the whole thing before you shred it. Once you do that, there's no going back. So anyway, there's all these different players that come together twice a month, and we review everything that's in the pipeline. Anything that's become a problem, anything that's ahead of schedule, anything that has to get pulled and put something in its place, we go through all of that. And only by doing that, and you're going to have to do the same on your side, only by doing that can you keep a program running. So anyway, I wish we had better tracking tools than we do. We actually discussed that today with our OCIO, Office of the Chief Information Officer. We described to them what a tracking system should look like for what we're doing. And I think it blew them away because it is so intricate. There are so many different facets to it. It is a monster task to do. If there's anything worse than the actual digitization, which you can probably contract out, it's the analysis and tracking system that you're going to have to build to keep track of this. It's not simple as the numbers go up. So anyway, this just describes a little bit more of what we deal with. And this is complicated. If you're trying to schedule an unknown, how long is it going to take to fix that thing? How long is conservation going to need, or any of the other elements in here? And what about vacation time and sick time? How's that all going to affect what you can get done? You got to figure all that out. And as the fellow on my staff who does all this likes to say, he keeps the plate spinning. It's just lots of different stuff that has to happen, and if something falls, you've got to have something that you can pull out of the hopper to take its place. Otherwise, you don't have a program. This is a little example of a feasibility assessment. You see the project here. I believe this is Asian material. I'm not quite sure which project that was, but these are all unique in that they have different properties that have to be addressed. You need to know that going in. Same thing with documents. You got to know what you're dealing with going in. Give you a sense of scale within the Library of Congress. These are most, but not all, of the areas where digitization is done. Many of these are divisional operations that have very specific ways of doing things. But at the beginning, going in, and at the end, going out, it's got to be the same. The material has got to play well together on the two basic types of presentation that we have, stacks and lock.gov, which we call P1. What happens in the middle has to be customized for each of the types of material that are dealt with, but it starts the same and it ends the same. And of course, at the end of the line is getting it ready to go online. And that's where the metadata has to be right. That's where all of the characteristics of what we've done have to match what they're used to dealing with. And if not, it becomes a special one-off, and that's just deadly. We can't move forward like that. So they have their ways of doing it. They're well proven, and we don't like to deviate from that at all. And the stacks being exactly the same thing, but another instance of it. It's an entirely different workflow going to stacks. So anyway, this is, I believe, the last slide. And it talks about, oh, here's the final product. Here is that material online for the world to see in various forms, various presentations, of course, with the metadata and the finding aids and all that kind of stuff, so that people can find it and use it. And again, without the metadata, you're not going to find it again. So yeah, that's what I've got for you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. There we go. We're back.
Okay, so anybody have any questions for Tom?
This is Beth. I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so you had mentioned during your presentation that you were scanning cultural and historical documents, and that you were talking about, making sure that the documents are captured properly, mm-hmm. and then you destroy them. So I'm just wondering,
well, we don't destroy them.
Okay, the program office does? Or?
Well, no. Maybe that was not clear. M1921 specifies that the documents get shredded at the end of the line. Our cultural heritage materials do not.
Okay, because that's why I was kind of asking, because it sounds like those would be archival status, or special collections that
yes.
you would create a business copy for, but maintain the original document.
Yeah, in our case, only our business records, for example, that need to conform to M1921 would be destroyed at the end of that line. Even temporary federal records, which don't go to the archives, I really can't say with certainty, but I'll bet you they keep them according to the federal record schedules.
Okay, and I have another question about who actually does the scanning? Who is your staff? Is that a contractor, or is this your own people?
We do both. There's no way in the world that federal employees could do all of this. I guess we could. One of the things that is a limiting factor for us at the Library of Congress is space, physical space. We don't have any. Every inch of our 3 buildings, plus our outbuildings, are occupied or claimed for various programs. So we were lucky enough to build that 6,000 square foot scan center. I actually had to give up office space to do that. So we're not likely to get more space, but we have vastly more requirement than that. So we do have contractors doing the work, mostly offsite, in their own facilities. In some cases, we have them on-site for materials that can't leave.
And so who supplies? You showed a lot of specialized equipment that was very expensive. If it's done off-site with a contractor, do you provide the equipment as a government furnished equipment, or do they have to purchase it as part of the contract?
They have to purchase it as part of their contracts. And if they can't afford it, they probably shouldn't be doing work for us, because the finance, I used to be in private business for many, many years, and the float on that, the outlay of cash that you're going to have to do to build a facility is so expensive, and the time between when you do the work and you get paid for it can be fairly long. they need to be financially secure. And so we do not buy equipment for them. We don't have them using government equipment at all, ever. I think there might have been one or two exceptions where a piece of equipment we had was unique and they were doing work on site and we would then get it done somehow. But no, we do not have contractors working with government equipment. We do have NTEs, not to exceed staff, usually 3-year, but almost all of them wind up eventually getting a full-time permanent government job. Very few of them don't get that.
This is Carol. You showed a list of different, I guess, divisions of the library that have these types of programs going on. Are there rules for prioritizing which projects get done first?
Yes.
Or, you know, which are at the top of the list in terms of importance?
That's right, there are. And that goes to that whole selection process with the DLCG, Digital Library Content Group. Anything that is going to wind up on the web or in the library's permanent collections, anything that fits that bill, and that's almost everything, must be approved by somebody, some organization within the library that has the authority to say, we're going to spend the money to put it online and keep it online. They're not allowed to just go ahead and digitize anything they feel like. It doesn't work that way. So we have to manage that overall effort, and that's what my team does. The digitization services within the Digital Services Directorate, that's what we're tasked with doing. It's kind of coordinating all that effort, seeing that the work that's being done in the divisions is a proper proposal and project, and we monitor each of the progress on all of that work. We absolutely have to. When a project is under construction within a division, for example, when is it going to be ready for the web? When is it going to be ready for that process? And have we allocated the space, the digital space for that to happen? And we can't just have projects crash in and say, oh, we need 4 terabytes of space today. No, that's not going to happen. We have to figure that out well in advance so that we don't wind up in situations like happened years and years ago where, oh, we're out of space. We have to park these on portable hard drives for a few months. No, we can't. That's just, as you scale up a program, that solution doesn't work. So yeah, we are managing all of that. We're just coordinating it, really.
And once you have these images, where do they reside? The ones that say the public is going to be accessing them?
Well, that goes to where are they hosted, and it's
Right.
offsite. That's a fun story, actually. It used to be on site at the Library of Congress. We didn't run out of space. We ran out of cooling. Those computers get hot, and it was just no longer practical to keep hosting on site. So it was all moved off into contracted, environments, I'll say. And of course, it's duplicated as is proper for digital storage. Beyond that, I don't want to say too much, but it's done properly.
Okay, other questions? Unmute yourself before you ask.
It helps. I put everybody to sleep.
Okay, anybody else out there want to ask a question?
Hi, Tom. I just have a question related more towards, and it might be, I might not have understood, but this is all paper that you're scanning, right? It's traditional documents and.
Oh, no.
And I'm curious what for the future, like things that are being created natively now that are different format, Are you looking forward to any of that at all, or is the Library of Congress looking?
Well, let's start with it's not all paper. It could be any recorded media format ever produced, whether that's photographs, transparencies, audio, motion picture, videotape, CDs, on and on and on. Whatever information was stored on in the past century or so are things that we have to deal with. And of course, the older it is, the more difficult it usually is. Right down to Edison wax cylinders, for example, where we worked with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory a decade ago to develop a system. They developed it. We paid for part of it. That's able to get the content of those without ever touching them. Because if you touched them, if you put a needle in the groove, it would destroy them. So we work on all sorts of different specialized medias to try and capture as much as we possibly can in various forms. Newspapers, for example, we collect them from all over the world. Tremendous amount of newspaper digitization occurs. Now, you were getting into digital media. In the last several years, we've seen the influx of what we call born digital content equaling and exceeding the physical content that we have to deal with, to the point where the entire division was formed about 5 years ago now, just about 5 years ago, to deal with that. And we split into two halves, one dealing with physical media, which is my side, and one dealing with born digital media, which is an entirely different set of issues to manage that. I'm going to say it's even harder because digital media can be almost anything. So how do you collar that one? And we have a fairly large team working at the library, side by side with us actually, that deals with that. And that includes web archiving, where when there's an election, we scrape the web. We capture all that and we keep it and we put it online. So there's any number of these things. Unfortunately, we can't catch it all. We can't capture the entire web. But again, decisions are made about what should we capture? What should we be cover? What should we be saving for eternity? Those are tough decisions.
Yeah,
Are not mine.
Similar to the Wayback Machine, and do they partnering with archive.org or like even Google Maps, and it just seems like there's a lot of this content is just.
There is, and actually we have a long history with Internet Archive. I don't think we have any current activity with them, but we have had for many, many years. I know Brewster Kahle well. I've been to his place out in California. We've cooperated in the past. We've actually helped them a little bit in design of imaging equipment. So, it's all friendly. Google is doing their own thing, and others are too. So that's all good. The only one I think we can really feel comfortable about, at least I can, is we're gonna be around for a while, I think. And I'm not so sure about any commercial organization.
Yep.
No. So
thank you.
Any more questions out there? Okay, well, it looks like we're out of time. So thank you all for being here, and thank you very much to Tom Rieger for this very interesting and different presentation than some of the ones we've seen recently. So I would like to say good night to everyone. Don't forget, we have a presentation in December 7th, on crowdsourcing digitization projects with the State of Maryland Archives. And in January, we have automating the FOIA process. So that's it from here. from Metro Maryland ARMA. Thank you again, Tom Rieger. And we're glad you were all able to join us.
Great. Thank you all. Happy to help.
Night, everybody.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.
Bye now.